Welcome to my 196th video on my work with OO gauge. In this part I'll cover my efforts to test the Hornby Dublo 3-rail turntable that I picked up recently at the Ancaster train show, and then to find a way to install the turntable to work with my Dublo 3-rail tabletop railway. Here is the turntable as I brought it back from the train show. I deliberately avoided buying one of these, even though I certainly would have liked to have one, simply because I couldn't fit one onto my 003-rail tabletop without severely limiting other aspects of my track plan. But seeing this one just sitting in front of me for $40, I couldn't resist taking it home, even though I wasn't at all clear what I was going to do with it. The turntable was a fairly late addition to the range of 003-rail accessories. As far as I can tell, it was designed in 1955, but probably didn't become available until the start of 1957. This is a page from the 1958 catalogue showing the turntable at a price of £2 5 Quite a bit of money for those days, although somewhat surprisingly I see that the through station was even more expensive at £2 10. Here's a rather clearer picture of the turntable with a Castle-class locomotive, from Hornby advertising material dating from 1958. This turntable is manually operated, that is to say you simply turn it round by hand. I'll show the operation in some detail later in this video. Personally, it doesn't bother me at all that the turntable is hand-operated. After all, most real turntables, at least back in the 1930s, my period, were simply turned by railway staff walking round and pushing them. Admittedly, this model doesn't attempt to include the necessary bars that were used for such pushing. I initially set my turntable up for testing on some cardboard laid over the top of my test track setup. So now let's see some video of that initial testing. Okay, so I'm just testing out this Hornby Dublo 3-rail turntable. I've put some cardboard down over my little test track, and that's where I've got it. Famous last words, and it's now declining to work. Why is it declining to work? Oh, because the controller's turned off. It will tend not to work if the controller's turned off. So there you go. We've taken the loco on it, and we couldn't take the loco straight off the other side. This is just the N2. I thought that was the easiest thing to use, and we can put it on there. Now, this is not, of course, an automatic turntable. To turn it, you just press down that little thing to release it and turn it manually, and then click it in again. There we go. Now this track is very vaguely set up, so we might get some derailments here, but no, it's a bit tricky to set the track up actually, because you can't fix the turntable down, and you wouldn't even be able to put a screw really through the track there because it's raised up by the turntable. But anyway. Okay, let's go all the way over to the other side. Whoops, forgot to change the direction. Now, I've already tested this before. I turned the camera on, so I don't expect this one to work. For some reason, it doesn't see. Nothing happens when I turn the power up in that position. That position does not work, so that's if you as you look across the turntable from the entrance, the fourth from the left does not work. The other three work. 1, 2, 3, and 5 work. Fourth does not. What can I say? And of course, you can turn the turntable completely round, and there's another set of locking latches on the other side. This little thing goes into these notches, and there's another set of notches on the other side. And then I can Oh, no, I want to keep the same direction. So I can back the turn to the local turntable. So it basically works, except for some reason the connection to that track, the fourth one, doesn't work. So I'm going to have it upside down and look at its wiring, and I suspect there's just a wire come off, or either there's a wire come off or there's a bad contact or something there. I just cannot, when I put it into that position, I can't get anything. But in the other positions, it works. So, and in terms of fit, you know, I mean, basically I'm looking at trying to fit it on something similar to the white foam thing that's underneath here, maybe with a bit of extra black stuff. So it'll just about fit. And this is probably about how I'm going to have it set up, with one track coming off from the outer loop of the main layout, and then, so I'm hoping, if I can get the shelf built properly. So we'll see. That's the plan. I had come up with a sort of a plan for using the turntable with my tabletop railway. Obviously, it wasn't going to fit onto the tabletop itself, at least not unless I removed some other major item, such as the engine shed or the station, which I didn't want to do. And I couldn't add to the tabletop at the front or the left, because I barely had room as it was to get round and access things that I needed to. I also couldn't extend the full width of the tabletop any further to the right, as that would make it impossible for me to squeeze past the front right corner. But I figured that I could add to the tabletop at the back right in the form of a sort of shelf running along the wall. If I replaced the full curve at the right-hand end of the back straight with a half curve and a right-hand point, as overlaid here, then another half curve connected to the straight section of that point could branch off onto a shelf extension. I had a 4 foot by 14.5 inch piece of white foam left over from building the basic tabletop, which I figured I could use as the basis for a shelf. I wanted to buy some more of the black foam tiles that I'd used for the tabletop to form the top of the shelf extension, but although Walmart's website said that my local store had those tiles in stock when I went there, they in fact didn't. Now, I should have perhaps just ordered a pack of the tiles and waited, but I wanted to get on, so I bought this exercise mat instead. I wasn't entirely sure how it would work out. It should certainly be large enough, as it was 24 by 68 inches, and I only needed a piece around 42 by 15 inches for the shelf. I couldn't make the shelf the full 4 feet long, as there was a clothing rack by the front door in the way, and I didn't want to lose that. And the thickness of the mat should be okay, but I was a bit concerned as to whether I could get it to lay flat enough, and also it was made of a softer foam than the tiles. Well, it had to be. The foam of the tiles wouldn't roll up like this. I took the mat out of its packaging, rolled it up the opposite way to it came rolled up, and reinserted it in the cardboard sleeve in an attempt to take out its tendency to roll itself up. I cut the white foam shelf piece down to length using the hot foam cutter that I bought from Amazon back when I was working on my first OO gauge layout, and I cut the black mat down to size with a sharp knife. Because the mat was made of quite soft, floppy foam, I couldn't extend it much beyond the edge of the white foam underneath, so my shelf ended up about 15.5 inches in width. Here's a lower view showing how I installed the shelf, 3 12-inch brackets of the same type that I used for my shelf layout upstairs, supporting a white foam slab 14.5 inches side to side by 42 inches long, with the black foam mat on top. I stuck the black foam mat down to the white foam using double-sided tape, the same as I'd used for the foam tiles on the main tabletop, although since the mat was softer I used more tape, so there was less in the way of gaps. At this point I went back to trying to figure out why the turntable wasn't working in one position. I used my multimeter to test for continuity. This is what the turntable looks like underneath. The incoming track connects at the top, as seen here, then a wire connects from that to a set of contacts, and an opposite set of contacts are connected by wires to the outgoing tracks. Unfortunately, I can't show you any more than this as to how the turntable works, as the center connection pivoting the turntable on the base appeared to be permanent. At least I couldn't see any non-destructive way to get it off. I assume that there are contacts on the bottom of the turntable which will connect across between the upper and lower contacts as seen here, depending on the angle that the table is set at. There didn't seem to be any problem with the attachment of any of the wires on my table. Actually, I never did figure out what the problem was. The turntable just randomly started working again in the fourth position after I turned it around and looked at it and tested continuity on the bottom. Perhaps there was just a piece of dirt or something on one of the contacts, and my repeated testing and turning dislodged it. And back to the shelf. I wanted to improve the connection between the main tabletop and the shelf, so I bought some black tape. And I put a piece of black tape along the join. Not a perfect solution, but it helped, and I thought that the shelf was probably well enough in line now with the main tabletop for me to proceed with laying track onto it. The only right-hand isolating point that I had was this one, which I'd bought at the train show, and someone had soldered the two contacts together so the point no longer isolated. Both outgoing centre rails were connected to the incoming centre rail at all times. I wanted the point branching to the turntable to isolate, so I needed to fix this. I got out my soldering station and turned it on, and got out a desoldering pump, the long blue thing you see here. And by heating the solder and then activating the desoldering pump, I removed the extra solder that was shorting across the two contacts, and then just soldered the wires back in place to their individual contacts. I was a bit concerned about how wide the outer tracks for the turntable were spreading, given how narrow my shelf was. I figured that instead of full straights, I could use half straights and then half curves for the outer tracks, so narrowing the ends a bit. To bring the inner tracks back parallel with the centre track, you'd need quarter curves, which are very rare, but if you really needed to do it, you could make your own by cutting. I wasn't concerned about making the tracks parallel, so long as they would fit on my shelf. I tested the repaired right-hand point on the bench with my multimeter, and it appeared to work okay. I cleaned all of the pieces of track that I was intending to use with fine emery paper and then electrical contact cleaner, and I checked the fish plates and used pliers to fix them up as needed. I backed away the train that was on the rear track, as I would need to lift the end of that track. I took out the screws holding down the curve at the end of the straight, and the screws holding down the ends of the tracks that connected to that curve. Then I removed that curve, because that was where I needed to put in my new point. I replaced the full curve that I'd removed with a half curve and then the repaired right-hand point, and then connected another half curve to the straight branch of that point. I tested with a train running round the altered corner. Unfortunately, but not too surprisingly, it didn't work well. I kept getting derailments on the point. It seemed that there might be a couple of problems with the point, where the incoming centre rail connected and where the outer moving rail connected with the piece towards the frog. The incoming centre rail was high and rather off-centre, which tended to result in the centre rail contact of the loco being knocked upward as it entered the point. I used pliers to bend the end of the incoming centre rail into a better position, lower and more central. There was a distinct step between the end of the outer pivoting rail and the fixed piece of rail leading to the frog. I used a grinding disc in a rotary tool and a file to try to smooth the transition between these rails, both vertically and laterally, that is, on the top and on the side, so that wheels could pass over the join smoothly. You can see here my initial attempts at adjustment, which improved things a bit, but more work was still necessary. A grinding disc in the rotary tool will take down rails quickly, so care needs to be taken. Also, it can't really get in well to the side of the rails. Eventually, I managed to get the point so that trains could run round the curve reliably without derailing. Not that I'll promise that nothing will derail on the point again, but it did seem to be fairly okay after my efforts. Having basically fixed the derailing issue, I screwed down the track pieces round the curve, too optimistically as it turned out. I could now run trains round the back loop section as before, and I was ready to proceed with track onto the shelf. Here you can see where I was proposing to go next. I brought the turntable down and tried it on the shelf. It would just about fit, although there wasn't much room to spare. I connected the turntable to the branch from the point using a full straight. In hindsight, it might have been better to use a half straight, leaving more space for the parking tracks on the other side of the turntable, but that might have made the issue with the slight incline up to the turntable worse. I connected up the parking tracks on the other side of the turntable, using half straights and half curves for the outer tracks to reduce the width of the spread. I put the one spare buffer stop that I had on the end of the centre parking track. I'm getting more buffer stops so that I can put buffers on the ends of all the parking tracks. However, there is no way that buffers can be put on the other side of the turntable, opposite the parking tracks, so I guess you just have to be careful when pulling locos from the parking tracks onto the turntable that you don't go too far. When I proceeded to the next step, testing the turntable in its new position with a loco, I didn't get past go, as the loco stopped dead as soon as it went straight over the point. So the point had stopped providing continuity of the centre rail for the straight branch, even though I had tested it on the bench before I installed it, and it worked fine then. Anyway, I had no choice but to remove the screws so that I could take the point up again. After some additional bending and cleaning of contacts, I did get the point to work, and I was able to reinstall it and get a loco to branch off the back loop onto the turntable. I tested the turntable in all positions, pulling the loco onto all of the parking tracks and back off again. All of this testing worked okay. I pulled the loco back off the turntable again. Now I tried to screw down the tracks on the shelf in as far as that was possible. I found that it was much harder to get screws to fasten into the mat than it had been into the foam tiles on the main table. The mat was made of softer, more rubbery foam, which tended to cling to the screw and prevent it from screwing in. I found that making a pilot hole with a small bit in a pin vise helped. Because the turntable raises the ends of the tracks attached to it, it isn't really possible to screw down those ends, and the turntable itself has no holes for screwing down, so I just screwed down the outer ends of the tracks. I tested everything again after screwing down the tracks. Fortunately, things did still work, but you can't assume that. Here you can see a more general view of how the shelf with the turntable is sitting off the back right of the main table. And here looking from the back of the turntable towards the main table. The shelf gives me a bit more space, so I may add a couple of other things, another signal box, for example. And, of course, the additional buffer stops need to be installed. At this point, I made some running videos showing operation of the turntable on the shelf, and I'll finish up by showing that. But whilst I was making that running video, I found that the parking tracks were a bit short, especially for a large Pacific loco like a Duchess. So I thought I should try to do something about making the parking tracks just a little longer, so there wouldn't be an issue with large locos possibly blocking access to the neighbouring tracks. However, there wasn't much room, and I didn't have much in the way of short track pieces. I had 3 1/8 straights that I just bought at the Ancaster train show. Those could have been used to adjust the reversing loop on the main table, but since that was basically working okay as it was, I wasn't very keen on taking everything up to adjust it. So I thought I might as well just use the 1/8 straights here, where they just about provide the extra length needed for the centre 3 tracks. I had some cut pieces left over that I thought I could use for the outer tracks, a piece about 1/4 straight, and another piece about a half curve. The half curve piece seen at back here would be too long as it was, so I'd need to cut that down some more. I cleaned the pieces with fine emery paper and contact cleaner. The 1/8 straight pieces were particularly filthy for some reason. I cut down the curve piece to just over 1/4, starting by cutting just beyond the middle centre rail support with a razor saw. Once I sawed through the rails, the end of the centre rail detached completely as there was no support for it on that side. Having cut through the rails, I used a cutting disc and a rotary tool to cut through the base, as it's tough and very hard to cut through with a saw. This gave me a short curved piece with supports for the centre rail at each end. I cleaned up the cut end with a file, as there were some sharp pieces there. Putting these pieces onto the ends of the parking tracks turned out to be more difficult than I expected. Of course, I had to take out the screws so that I could lift the ends of the rails to attach the new pieces, but then some of them wouldn't attach because the rails had been soldered in the past so that I couldn't get fish plates on without a certain amount of surgery to remove old solder, etc. However, I did manage to get all of the short pieces attached, and then I got the tracks screwed down again, as much as possible with the soft foam and the height of the turntable, and I retested everything with locos on all of the tracks. The parking tracks are a bit of an odd assortment now, but I believe that it should be possible to park large locos on all of those tracks without interference. So now I'll finish with a little demonstration running video, but this was shot before the addition of the extra short pieces to the end of the parking tracks. Okay, I'm just going to see if I can demonstrate the operation of my newly installed turntable, which is going to be a bit tricky because, quite honestly, I'm using one hand to operate the camera, one hand to operate the speed control, and quite honestly the turntable itself really needs two hands to operate, so I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do this, but we'll see what we can. So I've got the turntable on this newly built shelf here, branched off from the outer back, the back loop by that point, which I had quite a bit of trouble with, both electrically and physically. I had trouble getting it to switch properly, and I had trouble getting things to go over it without derailing, but I hope I've fixed that point now. So we got the N2 on the back there. I've got the point set to pass power to the back, so now if I reverse the N, famous last words, sorry, I've got the switch in neutral. If I reverse the N2, I should be able to reverse him onto the turntable. Now, excuse me, I'm going to have to put the speed control down so I can do anything useful with the turntable. The way, this is not an electrical turntable, of course. You press down this little lever that takes the locking thing out of the notch, and then you have to push the turntable round, and ideally you want two hands, one to hold the lever down and one to push it, because otherwise as soon as it gets to the next thing it's going to lock in. Now this was the one I was having the problems with before, this track, the fourth track. It's working now. I don't have any buffer stops on the end except for the middle track, because I don't have the buffer stops. I'm going to get some more. So now we'll put the turntable back to its mid position, and all being well, that should not, yes, so I turn the power up and nothing happens to that engine because he's parked. That's the whole point. You can park multiple trains on the turntable. You can park, 5 different trains there. Well, 4 anyway. Well, you can put 5, but one or other of them's going to move. Although you could put the bar of the turntable across, then none of them will move. Now, of course, there's no point me taking trains with coaches and wagons down this branch, because it just goes to the turntable, and really the turntable's only for handling locos. So, where are we? Let us bring the Duchess of Montrose that I was just replating out from the inner loop. So if I change this point, hopefully he should get some power. We want to go forwards, we'll bring him forwards. Oops, I beg your pardon. And, oops, I really don't have enough hands to do this. We'll change that point back. He's nearly hitting the park stuff. And hopefully if we can get him round without derailing or anything, he will now go on to the turntable. Now, of course, he's a bit more of a challenge because he's a big engine and barely fits on the turntable. Well, I think he fitted there just about. So I'm going to try and put the controller down now. I don't know whether he'll fit on that parking track though, but we'll try. I don't know whether there's actually room for him in that parking track. I may derail him, but if I derail him, it's not the end of the world, I suppose. There you go. Well, he barely fits on there. I could perhaps make those parking tracks a hair longer, not the middle one so much, but those outer ones I could put quarter straights or something on. Anyway, so let me once more put the turntable back to its middle position. And again, neither of those engines will move as I turn up the power because I don't have the turntable arm pointing at them. Okay, let me see if I can bring one more engine over. We'll change this point, and with a bit of luck we can bring this 8F out of the siding. Yep. Ah, famous last words, he's got stuck on the point. He got stuck on the point, he didn't quite manage to get enough power to get over the point. See, he's not moving very well, really. He needs a lot more power than the others. He's also going to be rather large. Oh, he's not as large as the Coronation, is he? No, not by a bit. Let's see if we can turn him round completely, but that's going to be a little difficult to do because I have to hold, see, I have to hold that lever down to be able to keep turning while I'm going past. See, now when this track gets to there, that little thing is going to snap in. See what I mean? So now I have to press that down again. Okay, there we go. So now we've accomplished your basic, simplest operation of a turntable, turning an engine. And of course, in two-track systems, I'd now have to switch the direction to make him come back, but not three rail. Because this is three rail, I just leave it on forwards and he'll go forwards, famous last words, but he will. There we go. Yes, he could do with a service, couldn't he? I can't remember whether I did attempt to service him. He certainly seems like he could do with a service. He's not going super well. But anyway, I think that, you know, we've sort of basically demonstrated the operation of the turntable pretty decently there.